The scariest place in the ocean isn't the bottom. Everyone points to the Mariana Trench. 7 miles down, cold, black, crushing. But almost nothing lives there. It's a graveyard. The place that should actually unsettle you starts just a few hundred meters below the waves, in a layer of half-light where billions of eyes are watching, waiting, and lying to each other with light. It's the most crowded hunting ground on the entire planet, and it's hiding right there, right beneath your boat. Down here, being alone would be a mercy, because in the Twilight Zone, you are never alone. Picture the ocean as a building turned upside down, not a flat blue surface with a dark basement, but a tower sinking floor after floor into the planet. The top floor is the one you know: sunlight, waves, fish you could name, water, warm enough to actually swim in, and that floor is thin, far thinner than most people imagine. It ends around 200 meters down. Below that, you step into the floor this entire story is about, and the rules you grew up with start to fall apart. The light doesn't switch off, it bleeds out. Somewhere past 200 meters, the blue goes deep and cold and thin, like the last minute of dusk, stretched over half a mile of water. Enough light to cast a shadow, not enough to see by. Scientists call this the mesopelagic. Most people call it the Twilight Zone, and the name is almost too gentle for what's happening inside it. Here's the assumption almost everyone carries, and it's the one we need to break first. We assume that deeper means deadlier, that the further down you go, the more monsters you'll find, the more danger, the more nightmare. So the trench, the deepest possible point, must be the worst of all. It's the natural climax, the bottom of the bottom. But that's not how the ocean works, not even close. Go all the way down to the trench floor, to the crushing dark at the very bottom, and what you find is mostly emptiness. Life exists there. Pale little shrimp-like scavengers, strange soft creatures, ghost white fish built to withstand pressure that would collapse a submarine. But they're spread impossibly thin. The trench is a desert, a vast, silent, freezing desert where almost nothing happens for years at a time because almost nothing ever arrives to eat. Food has to fall all the way from the surface to reach it, and by the time anything sinks that far, most of it has already been stripped away by everything living above. And that's the clue. That's the thing that flips the whole picture. Life doesn't gather at the extremes. Life gathers where the trade-offs are survivable. Not too much light, not too little, not too far from food. And in the open ocean, that sweet spot, that dangerous, crowded, contested sweet spot, sits right in the middle, in the twilight. Think about what the Twilight Zone actually offers. There's still a whisper of sunlight leaking down from above, which matters more than you'd guess. And there's food, because the surface, the sunlit floor above, is where almost all of the ocean's life begins. Tiny plants, tiny drifting animals, the base of nearly every food chain in the sea. All of that abundance lives up top. But up top is also the most dangerous place to be because up top you can be seen. Seabirds from above, big predators from below, sunlight that turns your body into a target. So an enormous amount of life makes a compromise. It stays deep enough to hide in the gloom, but close enough to the surface to still reach the food. That compromise is the Twilight Zone. It's not a wasteland between the surface and the deep. It's the most heavily populated real estate in the entire ocean, and by some measures, on the entire planet. I want to be honest about the numbers here because this is where it gets strange. For a long time, we badly underestimated how much life was down there. Our nets were too slow and the animals were too good at dodging them. Then better tools arrived. Sonar that could listen to the whole water column. sampling that caught what the nets missed. And the estimates didn't creep upward, they jumped. Some suggested there might be 10 times more fish down there than we'd ever assumed. 10 times. And these aren't final answers. They're still being argued over, still being refined. But even the low end of the range rewrites the map. The single largest chunk of fish life on Earth may not be in the reefs or the coasts or the surface we photograph and film. It may be hidden in this dim, unglamorous middle layer that almost no one ever looks at. Now sit with what that means. There is more animal life packed into this half-lit band of water than in any other part of the ocean. And nearly all of it is invisible to us. It's not that we've explored it and moved on. It's that we've barely looked. We have better maps of the surface of Mars than of this layer sitting a few hundred meters beneath our own ships. And here's the part that should make the back of your neck prickle. This isn't some remote region at the edge of the world. The Twilight Zone wraps the entire globe. It's beneath every ocean, under every shipping lane, under every beach horizon you've ever watched the sun set over. Right now, as you're hearing this, that crowded dark layer is out there full, awake, and hunting, under the same water you'd happily swim in on a summer afternoon. The surface is a thin, bright lid on something enormous. So we've broken the first assumption. Deeper is not deadlier. The trench, for all its fame, is a frozen dead end. The real action, the real crowding, the real pressure of survival is up here in the middle. But even that isn't the strangest thing about this place. Because if it's this packed with life, you'd expect it to look packed. You'd expect to point a camera into the Twilight Zone and see a wall of moving bodies, the way you'd see a swarm over a coral reef. You don't. Drop a camera into the mesopelagic, and most of the time it looks nearly empty. Black-blue water, drifting flecks, the occasional flicker of something at the edge of the light, gone before your eyes can lock onto it. A place we now believe holds more fish than almost anywhere on the planet routinely appears to hold almost nothing at all. That's not a failure of the camera. That's the whole point. That's the first sign that everything living down here has solved the same problem in 100 different ways. The problem of being surrounded on all sides by things that want to eat you, in water where there is nowhere to hide. In the Twilight Zone, being seen is death. So an entire world of animals has evolved to disappear. They erase their own shadows. They turn their skin transparent. They wear the exact color that vanishes in deep water. They carry their own lights not to shine, but to hide. Every one of those tricks is a survival tool, and we're going to take them apart one by one because each one is stranger than the last. But before any of that, there's a bigger mystery. And it's the reason this crowded layer stays so well hidden. Because the Twilight Zone is not still. It doesn't just sit there, waiting. Every single night when the surface goes dark, something happens down there that is almost impossible to believe until you've seen it on a screen. The entire layer. The fish, the shrimp, the squid, the countless creatures we can barely count, begins to move. Not a few of them, not a school here and there. Billions upon billions of animals all at once rising up through the black water toward the surface in the largest movement of life anywhere on Earth. And then, before dawn, they sink back down and vanish again, as if it never happened. Nobody's watching. It runs on its own schedule every night, everywhere in the ocean. And it has been running like this for longer than there have been humans to notice. It's the Twilight Zone breathing. And once you understand why it happens, what those billions of animals are so desperate to reach up top, and what they are so terrified of that they race back down before the sun can catch them, this place stops feeling merely strange. It starts feeling like a trap that resets itself every single day. Wait for it to get dark. That's when it starts. For most of the daylight hours, the twilight zone holds its breath. The animals stay down in the gloom, spread through that dim middle layer, doing everything they can to not be noticed. Then the sun drops below the horizon. The last of the light drains out of the water above, and on a sonar screen, you'd see something that looks less like biology and more like the seafloor itself deciding to stand up and move. A thick band on the display, a smear of returns that scientists once literally mistook for the bottom of the ocean, begins to climb, slowly at first, then steadily, floor by floor, rising through hundreds of meters of black water towards the surface. This is the Deal vertical migration, and it is the largest movement of animals on the planet. Not the largest in the ocean, the largest anywhere. Every night, across every ocean on Earth, an almost incomprehensible mass of life hauls itself upward through the dark, and every morning it sinks back down and disappears. Let me go back to that mistake, because it tells you how strange this is. When ships first started using sonar to find the seafloor, they'd sometimes get a solid return, a firm, echoing layer, at a few hundred meters down, in water they knew was thousands of meters deep, a false bottom, a floor that wasn't there. And the truly unsettling part, once they figured it out, was that this false floor moved. It rose at dusk and sank at dawn. They'd found a bottom made entirely of living bodies so densely packed that it bounced sound back like solid rock. They called it the deep scattering layer, a whole false seafloor made of animals migrating up and down on a daily clock. So the first question is simple. Why? Why would billions of creatures put themselves through this every single night? Swimming hundreds of meters upward is not cheap. For a small fish, it's the equivalent of a daily vertical marathon in freezing water, burning energy the whole way. Nothing in nature spends that kind of effort without a brutal reason. The reason is food. And the reason it has to happen at night is fear. Here's the trap these animals are caught in. The food is up top. The surface water is where sunlight fuels the tiny drifting plants that feed the tiny drifting animals that feed almost everything else. If you're a small hunter in the open ocean, that's where your dinner is. That's where you have to go. But going up during the day is suicide. In daylight, the surface is a killing floor. Clear, bright water where a bigger predator can see your silhouette from below, or a diving bird can spot you from above. You'd be a dark shape against a bright ceiling. You wouldn't last an hour, so they wait. They spend the entire day hiding down in the dim safety of the twilight zone, where the light is too weak for hunters to easily pick them out. And the moment the sun goes down and the surface goes dark, they make their move. They rise up under the cover of night, feed in the rich water at the top while the darkness hides them. And then, this is the critical part, they race back down before dawn. They have to be back in the gloom before the sun comes up and turns the surface into a spotlight again. That's the whole grim rhythm of it. Climb up to eat, hide the entire time, and flee back into the dark before the light returns to expose you. Every night, their whole lives. It's not a migration driven by hunger alone. It's driven by the constant, non-negotiable need to avoid being eaten. They are threading a needle between starvation and predation, and the needle only opens for a few hours, in the dark. Now compare that to the trench again, because this is where the contrast lands. The trench never does this. Nothing at the bottom of the ocean rises up to feed and flees back down at dawn. There's no rhythm there, no daily pulse, no urgency. The trench is static. It just sits, cold and unchanging, and waits for scraps to fall. The twilight zone, by contrast, has a heartbeat. It contracts and expands every 24 hours, dragging an ocean's worth of life up and down through the dark. One of these places is asleep. The other one is alive in a way that's almost hard to look at directly, and the scale of it keeps escalating the more you think about it. This isn't one species doing this. It's a staggering range of them. Small fish, shrimp-like animals, squid, jellies, countless things we still barely have names for. All pulled into the same nightly commute, all obeying the same clock written by the sun. When the light fades, the whole layer lifts. When it returns, the whole layer drops. It's the closest thing the open ocean has to a single, coordinated breath, and it's performed by billions of animals that have never met and never will. There's a detail here that makes it stranger. These animals are reading the light with extraordinary precision. They're not just reacting to full darkness. They're tracking the exact fading of light through the water, timing their ascent to the dimming, timing their descent to the first hint of dawn. Some will even adjust on a bright moonlit night, hanging back a little deeper, staying in the safer dark rather than rising all the way into moonlit water where they'd be visible again. They are constantly calculating a single equation: how much light is too much light, and getting that equation wrong, even slightly, means being seen. Being seen means being eaten. So the entire Twilight Zone runs on a knife's edge of light. That's the thread I want you to hold on to, because it's about to explain almost everything else down here. If the whole survival game is about controlling how visible you are, if the difference between living and dying comes down to whether a predator can pick your body out of the surrounding water, then evolution is going to attack that problem from every possible angle. And it has. This is why the Twilight Zone is packed with life, but looks empty when you point a camera at it. Every animal down there is running some strategy to not be seen. The migration is only the largest, most obvious one. It's the strategy of timing. Hide when the light is dangerous. Move when it's safe. But timing only gets you so far, because even at night, even at depth, there's still that faint glow filtering down from above. And in that faint glow, your body still casts a shadow. From below, a hunter looking up sees the whole layer of dim light overhead, and any animal above it shows up as a dark silhouette against that glow. You don't need bright sunlight to be visible. You just need to be a shadow between a predator and the light. In the Twilight Zone, that's enough to get you killed. Think about how impossible that makes hiding. There's no seafloor to duck behind. No rocks, no plants, no cave, no cover of any kind. Just open water in every direction, and a faint light overhead that constantly threatens to draw your outline for anything hunting below you. You are, at all times, a potential shadow. And the animals that survive down here are the ones that found ways to stop being one. That's the puzzle waiting in the next layer of this story. Because some of these creatures solved it in a way that sounds like science fiction. They didn't just hide from the light. They learned to make their own, pointing it downward, from their own bellies, to erase the very shadow that would give them away. They turned themselves into living counterlights, glowing into the dark beneath them, so that a hunter, looking up, sees nothing at all where their body should be. It's one of the strangest survival tricks in the entire ocean. And once you understand how it works, you'll never look at a glowing deep-sea animal the same way again. Because most of the time, that light isn't there to be seen. It's there to make the animal disappear. Let me ask you a question that sounds simple and isn't. What is the most numerous vertebrate on Earth? Vertebrate. Anything with a backbone. Fish, birds, reptiles, mammals, you. Take a second and actually guess. Because the answer tells you something profound about where life on this planet really lives. Most people reach for the obvious. Chickens. There are tens of billions of them, farmed across the world at any given moment. It's a good guess. Some people guess humans. There are billions of us now, and we're everywhere. Others think of some small, swarming surface fish, sardines, herring, something that moves in silver clouds off the coast. All reasonable, all wrong. The most numerous backboned animal on the planet is almost certainly a fish you have never seen, whose name you probably don't know living in the Twilight Zone. A small, unremarkable creature called a bristlemouth. And when I say numerous, I don't mean it beats the chicken by a little. The best estimates put bristlemouths in the hundreds of trillions, possibly more. Numbers so large they stop meaning anything. More individual bristlemouths than there are stars in the Milky Way. By a wide margin, this may be the single most successful vertebrate lineage in the history of the world. And here's the first twist. Almost no one has ever seen a live one. Sit with how strange that is. The most abundant animal with a backbone on the entire planet. And you could ask a room full of people to describe it and get nothing but blank stares. It doesn't appear in aquariums. It's not in the nature documentaries most people grew up on. It has no reputation, no fear factor, no fame. It is everywhere and invisible at the same time. That combination, total abundance, total obscurity, is itself a clue about the Twilight Zone. This is a place so hidden that its most successful resident, an animal outnumbering almost everything else alive, remained essentially a stranger to us. Why haven't you seen one? Partly because it's small. Most bristlemouths are just a few centimeters long, no bigger than your finger. But mostly because they're fragile, and they live in a world so different from ours that bringing one to the surface tends to destroy it. Haul one up in a net, and the change in pressure and temperature ruins the body before you can get a good look. For a long time, the things we pulled up were damaged, blurred versions of the real animal. We were trying to understand the most common vertebrate on Earth from broken pieces. Now, why are there so many of them? This is where you have to think like the Twilight Zone thinks. Because at first, it makes no sense. This is a hard place to live. Food is scarce and unreliable. The water is cold. Parts of it barely have enough oxygen to breathe. Every strategy we've talked about so far has been about surviving under pressure. So how does one small fish become the most abundant vertebrate alive in a place this difficult? The answer is that it wins by doing almost nothing. The bristlemouth is not fast. It's not a fierce hunter. It doesn't dominate anything. It's a small, slow, energy-thrifty little animal that has stripped its life down to the absolute minimum. And in the Twilight Zone, that minimalism is the winning strategy. Think about the problem this environment sets. Food is rare, so an animal that burns huge amounts of energy, a big, fast, hungry hunter, is constantly at risk of spending more than it can find. But an animal that barely moves, barely burns anything, and can survive on tiny scraps of food, that animal can persist almost anywhere in this layer, in numbers the fast hunters could never reach. The bristlemouth doesn't overpower the Twilight Zone. It undercuts it. It survives on so little that it can afford to exist in astronomical numbers. This is a pattern worth burning into your mind, because it comes up again and again down here. In the Twilight Zone, success rarely looks like strength. It looks like efficiency. The most successful animals are often the ones that found how to survive on the least. Where life is scarce, the winner is not the biggest engine. It's the one that sips fuel while everything else guzzles it. And that reframes the whole layer. When you picture the Twilight Zone, don't picture a few dramatic monsters lurking in the dark. Picture an almost unimaginable multitude of small, quiet, efficient animals spread through the water in numbers we can barely estimate, with the occasional predator moving among them. The bristlemouths and their kind are the true population of this place. The scary-looking hunters we love to put on thumbnails are the rare exceptions, riding on top of a vast, silent majority of the small and the plain. Let me put the scale in terms you can actually feel. If you could somehow tag every bristlemouth in the ocean and light it up, the Twilight Zone would blaze. A glowing haze of trillions of tiny fish wrapped around the entire planet, in a band a few hundred meters thick, under every stretch of open ocean on Earth. That's not a metaphor for how full this layer is. That's roughly the real distribution. The most common vertebrate on the planet forms a nearly continuous living shell around the world, and it sits just below the surface we think we know. Now put the trench next to that. Down at the bottom, in the deepest water, life is so sparse that finding a single fish is an event. Researchers watching the trench floor can wait a long time between visitors. Every animal down there is precious, precisely because it's rare. The Twilight Zone is the opposite in every way. It's not defined by rarity. It's defined by overwhelming, near uncountable abundance. One of these places makes you feel the emptiness of the deep. The other makes you feel something more disturbing. The sense of being outnumbered by life you can't see. And that's the feeling I want to leave you with here, because it changes how the rest of this story lands. It is one thing to be alone in the dark. The trench offers you that, a cold, empty solitude. It's another thing entirely to be surrounded, on every side, in every direction, by more living things than you could ever count, and to not be able to see a single one of them. That's the Twilight Zone. You are never alone in it. You are simply outnumbered by the invisible. Which brings us straight back to the central mystery of this whole place. If it's this crowded, if there are trillions upon trillions of animals filling this layer, why does it look empty every time we point a light into it? Why isn't the water thick with visible bodies? Because down here, being visible is the one mistake you don't get to make twice. And an animal that exists in these numbers, in open water with nowhere to hide, is under relentless pressure to solve the same problem the bristlemouth's efficiency doesn't solve on its own. The problem of being seen. Being small helps you eat less. It does nothing to stop a predator from spotting your outline against the faint light above. So the Twilight Zone became an arms race of invisibility. Not one solution, dozens. And the strategies these animals evolved to disappear are so precise, so counterintuitive, that when we finally understood them, they sounded less like camouflage and more like magic tricks performed with the laws of physics. The first of those tricks turns everything you assume about glowing in the dark completely upside down. Because when a Twilight Zone animal lights up, it usually isn't trying to be seen at all. It's doing the opposite. It's using light to vanish. And to understand how something can glow in order to disappear, you have to understand exactly how a hunter down here finds its prey in the first place. By looking not for the animal, but for its shadow. Here's the trick that breaks your intuition. To hide in the Twilight Zone, some animals don't turn their lights off. They turn them on. To understand why that isn't insane, you have to stop thinking like a land animal and start thinking like a hunter in open water. Up here in our world, we hide in the dark. Darkness is cover. You duck into shadow, you go still. You disappear. That instinct is so deep, we don't even question it. But it only works because on land, light comes from one direction, the sky. And there are objects everywhere to hide behind. Trees, rocks, buildings, walls. The world is full of things to put between yourself and the thing hunting you. Now take all of that away. In the open Twilight Zone, there is nothing to hide behind. No cover in any direction, just water and a faint glow coming down from the surface above. And that changes the entire geometry of hiding because of one simple fact. A huge number of the predators down here hunt by looking up. Think about why. If you're a hunter in the Twilight Zone and you look down or sideways, you're staring into blackness. You can't see anything against a dark background. But if you look up toward that faint remaining light filtering down from the surface, you've got a dimly glowing ceiling. And anything swimming above you, between you and that ceiling, shows up as a dark silhouette against the glow, a shadow, a shape blocking the light. That's the target. Down here, predators aren't looking for animals. They're looking for the shadows animals cast against the sky, which means your body is a problem. Not your color, not your movement. Just the plain fact that you're a solid object with light behind you. You block the glow. You cast a shadow downward. And to a hunter looking up, that shadow is a dinner bell. You could hold perfectly still. You could be any color you like and it wouldn't matter. As long as light is coming from above and you're a solid shape in front of it, you are visible from below. You are, permanently, a silhouette waiting to be spotted. So how do you erase a shadow you can't stop casting? You fill it in with light. This is called counter-illumination, and once you understand it, it's one of the most elegant survival tricks in the entire ocean. Animals that do this have rows of tiny light-producing organs along their undersides. Their bellies, the parts that face downward, and they switch them on. They glow gently from below, not to shine, not to signal, but to match the exact faint light coming down from the surface, so that when a predator looks up at them, there's no dark shape against the glow anymore. The animal's belly is producing precisely enough light to fill in the shadow it would otherwise cast. The silhouette vanishes. The hunter looks up, and where there should be a telltale dark shape blocking the light, there's just more light, even unbroken, empty water. The prey has disappeared into the glow. Let that sink in. These animals are camouflaging themselves not against a background of coral or sand or rock, but against light itself. They're wearing the sky on their bellies. And the precision this requires is where it gets genuinely astonishing. It's not enough to just glow a little. The light from above changes. It gets dimmer as you go deeper. It shifts through the day. On a bright day, it's stronger. As clouds pass, or the sun sinks, it fades. If your belly is glowing too brightly, you're now a light that's too strong for the background. You've turned yourself into a beacon, which is just as deadly as being a shadow. If you're glowing too dimly, your shadow shows through, and you're spotted anyway. To disappear, you have to match the background light almost perfectly, and the background is always changing. So these animals adjust. Many of them can sense the light coming down from above and tune their own glow to match it, brightening when the water above brightens, dimming when it dims. They are running a constant automatic calibration, matching their output to the exact conditions overhead, so that from below they stay invisible, no matter how the light shifts. It's a living, self-adjusting cloak, powered by the animal's own body, recalibrated moment to moment against a target it can't fully see. And now step back and look at what this tells you about the Twilight Zone as a whole. This is a place where the pressure to be invisible is so intense that evolution didn't just make animals dark or transparent or good at hiding. It went further. It built creatures that generate their own light for the sole purpose of not being seen. Think about how backwards that is. Light, in almost every environment on Earth, is the thing that reveals you. Down here, light became a tool for disappearing. That inversion, light as camouflage, only makes sense in a world where the whole game is controlled by a faint glow from above, and where being a shadow is the one unforgivable mistake. This is also the answer to the mystery we've been circling since the beginning. Why does the most crowded layer in the ocean look empty when you point a camera into it? Part of the answer is right here. A significant share of the animals down there are actively erasing themselves. They're not just failing to stand out. They are running dedicated machinery to cancel their own visibility. When you drop a light into that water, you're looking at a layer full of creatures engineered, by millions of years of being hunted, to not be there when someone looks. The emptiness isn't real. It's a performance, and every animal in the audience is in on it. Compare that one more time to the trench. Down at the very bottom, there's almost no light at all. So there's almost no shadow to cast, and almost no reason to evolve this kind of trick. The pressure that built counter-illumination doesn't exist down there in the same way. It exists here in the twilight precisely because this is the layer with just enough light to make you visible and not enough to let you see. That in-between glow, the very thing that makes it twilight, is what forces these animals into their most extraordinary adaptations. The trench is too dark to bother hiding from. The twilight zone is exactly bright enough to be lethal, but counter-illumination only solves one direction. It hides your shadow from something looking up at you against the light. It does nothing for the hunter coming at you from the side or from above, looking down into the dark where there's no glow behind you to match, and it does nothing about a different problem entirely, the problem of your own color, because you might assume that in near darkness, color stops mattering. What's the point of being red or black or silver when there's barely any light to see it by? That assumption is wrong, and the way it's wrong is one of the strangest things about this entire place. Down here, color doesn't stop mattering. It becomes a survival tool in a way that would look impossible at the surface. There are animals in the twilight zone painted the brightest, boldest color you can imagine. A deep, vivid red. And they wear it precisely because, in this water, that screaming red color makes them completely invisible. At the surface, that same red would make them stand out like a warning light. Down here, it erases them. And to understand how the loudest color in nature becomes the perfect hiding color, you have to understand something about light that changes the moment it enters deep water. Something that turns the entire rule book of color inside out. Pull up a photo of a deep-sea shrimp, and it'll often be a brilliant, glowing red, blood red, the kind of red that screams, "Look at me." It seems like the worst possible choice for an animal trying to survive in a place where being seen gets you killed. Why would anything living in a world built entirely around not being noticed paint itself the loudest color there is? Because down where it actually lives, that red isn't loud at all. Down there, red is invisible. In fact, red might be the most perfect camouflage in the entire ocean. And to understand why, you have to understand that color, the way you know it, is a lie that only works near the surface. Here's the thing nobody tells you about color. An object doesn't really have a color on its own. What you see as red is an object that takes in every other color of light and bounces red back into your eyes. For that to work, there has to be red light around to bounce. A red shrimp looks red because white sunlight, which contains every color mixed together, hits it, and the shrimp reflects the red part back at you. No red light, no red shrimp. And this is where the ocean does something strange. Water eats light. Not all at once, and not evenly. As sunlight sinks into the sea, the water strips the colors out of it one by one, in order. And the very first color to go, the first to be completely absorbed and erased, is red. Red light barely makes it past the top layers of the ocean. By the time you're a couple hundred meters down, in the twilight zone, there is essentially no red light left at all. It's been swallowed by the water above. What little light remains down there is a narrow band of blue-green, and nothing else. Now follow that to its conclusion, because it's beautiful and it's ruthless. A red animal is an animal that reflects red light. But in the twilight zone, there is no red light to reflect. So the red animal has nothing to bounce back. It reflects the one color that isn't there. And an object that can't reflect any of the available light doesn't look red. It looks black. It absorbs the blue-green that surrounds it and gives nothing back. It becomes a shape of pure darkness in dark water, invisible. That's the trick. That's why the Twilight Zone is full of blazing red animals. Their red is a disguise that only reveals itself under our lights, at our surface, in our world. We haul them up, or we point a white spotlight at them, and suddenly all the red light we've added comes flooding back, and they light up like warning flares. But that's an illusion we create. In their actual home, in that thin blue-green gloom, they are wearing the one color that turns them into nothing. They're not bright, they're erased. We've just been looking at them with the wrong light this whole time. This is one of those facts that reorganizes how you see the whole layer. Every one of those gorgeous red deep-sea creatures in the photos, the shrimp, the fish, the jellies, isn't beautiful down there. It's hidden. That red is not decoration. It's a survival system as sophisticated as any camouflage on land, tuned to the exact physics of how light dies in water. On land, animals evolved to match the browns and greens around them. Down here, they evolved to match the absence of a color. They became invisible by reflecting light that doesn't exist. And once you understand that light gets stripped down to almost nothing in the Twilight Zone, you can see the deeper game being played. Because if light is this scarce and this controlled, if the whole environment runs on a thin thread of blue-green and the near total absence of everything else, then any animal that can bend the rules of light, even slightly, holds an enormous advantage. And a few of them have. Here's the setup. Almost everything down here that can produce light produces blue-green light. It makes sense. That's the color the water lets travel, the color everything else can see. So the eyes of Twilight Zone animals are tuned almost entirely to blue-green. That's the wavelength their whole world runs on. It's what their prey can see. It's what their predators can see. Blue-green is the shared language of light in the deep. And in that shared language, everyone can see everyone else's signals. But what if you could speak a color no one else could hear? There's a type of predator down here, a dragonfish, that appears to have done exactly that. Most of the light in the Twilight Zone is blue-green, and most eyes only see blue-green. But some of these dragonfish produce red light, deep red, from organs near their eyes. And because red light is absent from this world, almost nothing else down here has any reason to see it. So most of the animals around them are effectively blind to it, which means this predator may be walking around with a searchlight that only it can see. Think about what that does. In the Twilight Zone, if you switch on a normal blue-green light to find your prey, you've also just announced your exact location to every predator and every meal in range. Your light betrays you the instant you use it. But a red light shines out, bounces off the prey, hiding in the dark, including all those red animals that thought red made them invisible, and comes back to the dragonfish's eyes, while the prey never sees a thing. It's a private wavelength, a hunting beam invisible to almost everything it's pointed at. The predator gets to see without being seen. In a world where being seen is death and light is the ultimate liability. I want to be careful here, because this is the kind of adaptation where the fine details are still being worked out. Exactly which species do it, exactly how well they see their own red light, how much of an edge it really gives them in the wild. That part is genuinely difficult to study on an animal that falls apart when you bring it to the surface. But the core of it is real. In a world built entirely on blue-green, a few hunters found a color no one else was watching for, and turned it into a weapon. And that changes what light means in this place one more time. Follow the escalation. First, light from above was the danger, the thing that cast your shadow and got you killed. Then light became a shield, animals glowing from their bellies to erase that shadow, hiding by producing light. Now light has become a hidden weapon, a private wavelength, a searchlight aimed at prey that can't perceive it. In the Twilight Zone, light is never just light. It hides you, it reveals you, it lies to you, depending entirely on who's producing it and who can see it. Which is the real reason this layer is so unsettling and the trench isn't. In the trench, it's simply dark. Honestly, completely dark. There's no light to distort, no color to erase, no wavelength to exploit. The dark down there is at least honest with you. Up here in the twilight, light is present, but untrustworthy. It bends the rules. It can be faked, hidden, weaponized. Nothing you see is necessarily what it seems, because the very medium you'd use to understand the world, light itself, has been turned into a tool of deception by the animals living in it. And if a predator can carry a light its prey can't see, then you've crossed a line. You've moved past camouflage, past hiding, into something more deliberate. You've entered the world of active deception, where light isn't just used to disappear, but to lie, to lure, to trap. Because the moment an animal figures out that it can control what another animal sees, it can start using light not to hide at all. It can start using light as bait. There's a light in the dark, small, steady, gently glowing. In a world of pure blackness, it's the only thing to move toward. A little point of brightness hanging in the water, almost inviting. Do not swim toward the light, because in the Twilight Zone, a light in the dark is very often the last thing an animal ever sees. It's not a comfort. It's not a signal. It's bait, dangled by something patient and hungry, waiting in the black just behind the glow. And the animal that made that light has turned the deep sea's most precious resource, the ability to see, into a trap. We've watched light do a lot of jobs down here already. It reveals you, so you hide from it. It shields you, so you glow to erase your shadow. It can even be a private weapon, a color your prey can't see. But this is the moment light stops being about you and starts being about controlling someone else. This is deception, and the Twilight Zone runs on it. Start with the most famous example because it deserves its reputation. The anglerfish. You know the image even if you don't know the name. The nightmare face, the gaping mouth full of needle teeth, and the thin stalk arching over its head with a glowing bulb at the tip. That glowing lure is the whole strategy. The anglerfish hangs in the dark, almost motionless, dangling that little light in front of its own mouth. To a small animal in the blackness, that glow looks like something worth investigating. Maybe food, maybe another creature, maybe just the only interesting thing in an empty void. It swims closer and closer, right up to the light, right into the mouth. Now here's the detail that makes it stranger than a simple fishing rod. The anglerfish, in many cases, doesn't actually make that light itself. It can't. The glow comes from bacteria, living microorganisms packed into the tip of the lure, producing light through their own chemistry. The anglerfish grows a special organ, a little pocket, and fills it with these glowing bacteria, feeds them, houses them, and in exchange, gets a light it could never have made on its own. Two completely different forms of life, fused into one hunting tool. The predator supplies the trap. The bacteria supply the bait. The lure that draws prey to its death is, itself, a partnership. Sit with that for a second, because it tells you how deep the deception runs here. The anglerfish didn't just evolve a light. It recruited an entirely separate organism to generate the light for it, and built its whole hunting strategy around borrowed chemistry. In the Twilight Zone, even the lies are collaborations, and the anglerfish is only the obvious version. Once you understand that light can be used to manipulate what other animals do, You start seeing the whole layer differently. Every glow becomes a question. Is that light trying to hide something, attract something, warn something? Is it a mating call, a lure, a threat, or a trick? Down here, you genuinely cannot tell just by looking. A light in the twilight zone carries no reliable meaning. It could be a creature trying to disappear. It could be a trap with teeth behind it. The same signal, a glow in the dark, can mean completely opposite things depending on who's making it and why. That ambiguity is the whole point. In a world where everyone can produce light, no light can be trusted. But the most ingenious use of light down here isn't for hunting at all. It's for survival. And it turns the entire logic of hiding inside out. Because so far, every strategy we've seen has been about not being noticed. This one is the opposite. Some animals, when they're attacked, do everything they can to be noticed. They light up as brightly and as violently as possible. It's called the burglar alarm, and the logic behind it is almost diabolical. Picture a small animal, say, a certain kind of jelly, drifting in the dark. A predator grabs it. In that instant, most prey would go dark, go still, try anything to escape unseen. But this one does the opposite. The moment it's attacked, it erupts in light. A brilliant, spinning, spreading burst of glow, flashing out in every direction into the black water. It's not trying to hide, it's screaming. And here's why that works. Think about the predator's situation. This predator is a small to medium hunter, and it too is prey to something bigger. It too spends its life trying not to be seen, because a light in the twilight zone draws attention. And attention is death. So when its meal suddenly detonates into a blaze of light, that hunter has a terrible problem. It's now standing in a spotlight of its own victim's making, lit up and visible to everything larger in the neighborhood. The burst of light is a beacon that says, to every bigger predator in range, here is a meal, right here, holding still, distracted, and eating. So the predator faces a brutal calculation. Hold on to this glowing prey and risk getting eaten yourself, or drop it and flee back into the dark before something bigger arrives. Often, the smart move is to let go, and that's exactly what the alarm is for. The prey isn't trying to escape by hiding. It's trying to escape by making its own attacker too dangerous to be near. It survives not by disappearing, but by turning the light of its own death into a threat aimed at the thing killing it. It essentially calls down a bigger predator on its own captor and slips away in the chaos. That is a survival strategy built entirely on manipulating what other animals can see, and on understanding, in the blind, instinctive way evolution understands things, that in the twilight zone, being visible is dangerous for the hunter too. The prey weaponizes the one universal law of this place. Light gets you killed. It just points that law at whatever's trying to eat it. Step back and look at what we've got now. In this single layer of water, light is a lure that draws prey to their deaths. Light is an alarm that turns a predator into prey. Light is a partnership with bacteria, a private weapon, a shield, a shadow eraser. The same phenomenon, a glow in dark water, is being used simultaneously to hunt, to hide, to escape, to deceive, and to kill. Every animal down here is both broadcasting and reading light, and almost none of those signals can be trusted. It is an entire world running on visual deception, a place where the most basic act, seeing something and believing it's real, will get you eaten. Now compare that to the trench one more time. Down at the bottom, in the honest dark, there's very little of this. Not enough light, not enough crowding, not enough constant predator pressure to build an economy of lies this elaborate. The trench is empty and truthful. The twilight zone is crowded and deceptive. And I keep coming back to this because it's the heart of why this place is creepier than the deepest point on Earth. The trench can kill you with cold and pressure and emptiness. The Twilight Zone can kill you with a lie, with a light you chose to trust. So if you can't trust light, if every glow might be a trap and every shadow might be a hunter, then there's one strategy left that beats all of it. Don't cast a shadow. Don't reflect any light. Don't give off any glow that could be read at all. Become so completely see-through that light passes straight through your body as if you weren't there. Not hidden, not disguised. Simply absent. And there are animals down here that have taken invisibility that far. Bodies you could look directly at and never see. And one creature in particular with a design so strange that when we first filmed it alive, people refused to believe it was real. What if the best way to survive in a world full of watching eyes is to not have a body they can see at all? Not hide it, not disguise it, erase it. Turn your flesh so clear that light goes straight through you and out the other side, as if the water simply continued where your body should be. No shadow to spot, no color to catch, no outline to trace. Just a faint shimmer where a solid animal ought to be, and then nothing. This is the end game of everything we've talked about. The Twilight Zone punishes visibility so relentlessly that some animals stopped trying to blend in and simply became transparent. And transparency is a far harder trick than it sounds, because a body is full of things that block light: muscle, guts, blood, bone. Every one of those tissues normally stops light cold. That's why you can't see through your own hand. To become see-through, an animal has to solve that problem tissue by tissue, making muscles that don't scatter light, fluids that don't absorb it, organs somehow hidden or shrunk or made clear. It's one of the most demanding forms of camouflage in nature, and down here it's everywhere. Transparent shrimp, transparent jellies, transparent fish larvae, whole animals reduced to living glass, drifting through the gloom as barely there smudges. And it works for exactly the reason you'd expect by now. If a predator is looking up for shadows, a transparent animal casts almost none. If a hunter is scanning for a shape, there's no shape to find. The animal hasn't matched its background. It has become its background. Light doesn't reflect off it or stop at it. It passes through. In a world where being a solid object is the fundamental danger, these creatures found a way to stop being solid, at least to the eyes hunting them. But transparency has a weakness, and this is where the Twilight Zone produces something that looks genuinely impossible. There's one part of the body you cannot make transparent: the eyes. Eyes have to work by capturing light. That's the entire job. An eye that let light pass straight through would be a window, not an eye. Useless, blind. To see anything, an eye needs pigment, something dark to catch the light and register it, which means no matter how clear the rest of your body becomes, your eyes stay opaque. They stay visible. An otherwise invisible animal is betrayed by two dark spots hanging in the water. Its own eyes, the one thing it can't erase. In a place where a single dark shape can get you killed, that's a serious problem. Your eyes are a liability you cannot remove because you need them to survive. And this is the setup for one of the strangest animals we've ever filmed. A creature that took the transparency problem, the eye problem, and the shadow problem, and solved all three at once with a design so bizarre that when the first clear footage of it surfaced, a lot of people simply didn't believe it was a real animal. It's called the barrel eye. And its solution is a transparent head. Not a transparent body, a transparent head. A clear, fluid-filled dome on top of its skull, like a cockpit canopy made of living tissue. And you can see straight down into it. Inside that clear dome sit its real eyes. Two glowing green orbs, tucked inside its own see-through forehead, pointing not forward, but straight up. The barrelly swims through the dark, looking up through the top of its own transparent head, watching the faint glow above for the silhouettes of prey drifting overhead. Let me make sure that image lands, because it's easy to hear and hard to actually picture. Imagine a fish with a windshield for a forehead. Behind the glass, two eyes on stalks, aimed at the ceiling, scanning upward through the clear dome for the shadow of anything passing above. The eyes glow a deep green, likely a filter that helps it separate the faint sunlight from above from the bioluminescent glow of the animals it's hunting, so it can tell the difference between light coming down and light being made by prey. It is, essentially, a living observatory, a creature built around the single act of looking up through its own skull. Now here's the twist that turns the whole thing on its head. The detail that fooled us for decades. On the front of the barrelly's face are two dark spots that look exactly like eyes. For years, that's what we assumed they were, because we only ever had damaged, dead specimens pulled up in nets. And the delicate, transparent dome always got destroyed on the way to the surface. So the animal we thought we knew had eyes on the front of its face, looking forward, like almost every other fish. We built the wrong animal out of the broken pieces. Those spots on the front, they aren't eyes at all. They're its nostrils. The real eyes are the green orbs inside the transparent dome, and they normally point straight up. But they can rotate. The barrelly can swivel its eyes forward inside its own head, tracking prey as it moves in to feed, watching its meal the whole way down its own throat. It took capturing a live one and keeping that fragile, clear dome intact to finally see what this animal actually was. Everything we'd assumed came from studying a corpse that had lost the very feature that made it extraordinary. Hold on to that, because it's a lesson this whole layer keeps teaching. Almost everything strange about the Twilight Zone was hidden from us, not because it's far away, but because it's fragile. These animals are built for a world of gentle pressure, and cold and dark, and the act of bringing them into ours destroys the exact things that make them remarkable. We spent a long time reconstructing the Twilight Zone from wreckage, from animals that fell apart the moment we touched them. The barrelized transparent head is the perfect symbol of it. The most important part of the animal was the part that never survived the trip to the surface. We had to go down to it and film it alive to even understand what we were looking at. And there's one more piece to the barrelized design that ties it back to everything we've seen. That clear dome isn't just for looking. It may also be armor. The barreleye is thought to feed, at least sometimes, by stealing prey from siphonophores, those long, drifting, stinging colonial hunters we're about to meet. And the transparent shield over its eyes could protect them from the stings while it robs the trap. So the dome does three jobs at once. It lets the eyes see up. It keeps the whole head nearly invisible. And it shields those precious, unhideable eyes from the weapons of the things it steals from. One structure solving the shadow problem, the transparency problem, and the danger problem, all together. That is the Twilight Zone, forcing an animal to answer every survival question simultaneously. And the answer looks like science fiction. So we've now watched life down here solve the problem of being seen in every way there is. Hide by timing. Hide by erasing your shadow with light. Hide by wearing a color that doesn't exist. Hide by becoming transparent glass. Every one of these is a response to the same relentless pressure. In the Twilight Zone, to be visible is to be dead. But I've been telling you this whole time that the real monster in the deep is often not a predator at all. And it's time to prove it. Because there's a threat down here that no amount of invisibility can save you from. It doesn't hunt you. It doesn't chase you. It can't be hidden from, because it isn't looking for you. It's all around you, in the water itself. In certain bands of the Twilight Zone, The water turns against you in a way that has nothing to do with teeth or eyes or light. It stops letting you breathe. Everything we've talked about so far has been a threat with eyes, a predator that hunts you, a hunter that lures you, a mouth waiting behind a light. And the answer to all of them has been the same. Don't be seen. Hide, and you live. But there's a threat down here that doesn't care whether it can see you. You can be invisible, transparent, red, glowing, perfectly hidden. It makes no difference at all. Because this threat isn't a creature, it's the water itself. And in certain layers of the Twilight Zone, the water quietly stops, letting anything breathe. We think of the ocean as full of oxygen. It's water, it's the sea, of course you can breathe it. If you're built with gills anyway. And near the surface, that's true. The top of the ocean is rich with oxygen, stirred in from the air above and pumped out by all those tiny sunlit plants. But go down into the Twilight Zone, and in many parts of the world you hit something that shouldn't feel as sinister as it does. A band of water where the oxygen just drops, falls away to almost nothing. A layer, sometimes hundreds of meters thick, where there is so little oxygen that most animals simply cannot survive there. Scientists call it the oxygen minimum zone, and it sits right in the middle depths, right in the heart of the Twilight Zone, wrapped around huge stretches of the planet. Where does the oxygen go? This is the grim irony of it. The oxygen minimum zone is a byproduct of how alive the ocean is. Remember all that life up top? And all that dead material constantly raining down from the surface? As that material sinks through the middle depths, bacteria feed on it, breaking it down. And breathing, for bacteria just like for us, consumes oxygen. So you get a layer where the falling feast of dead matter fuels a vast population of decomposers. And that army of tiny breathers draws the oxygen down and down until the water is nearly suffocating. The Twilight Zone chokes itself. The same rain of food that makes this layer rich also creates a band within it, where the water can barely sustain life at all. Now think about what that means for an animal trying to live here. It's already dealing with the constant threat of being eaten. It's already spending its life hiding, glowing, timing its movements against the light. And now, layered on top of all of that, is a zone where the very act of breathing becomes difficult or impossible. Imagine trying to survive somewhere that is simultaneously full of predators and starved of air, where you can't hide from the water because you're inside it. That's the Twilight Zone with the oxygen minimum zone running through it. The environment isn't just a stage where the danger happens. The environment is the danger. So what do you do? How does anything live in water that won't let it breathe? Some animals simply don't. They stay above the low oxygen band, or below it, avoiding it the way you'd avoid a wall of fire. But others, and this is where it gets remarkable, have gone the other way entirely. They've moved into the suffocating water on purpose. They've made a home in the one place almost nothing else can follow. To do it, they've had to rebuild their own bodies around the shortage. Some have blood that grips oxygen far more tightly than ours ever could, wringing every last usable trace out of water that would leave us unconscious in minutes. Some have enormous, ultra-efficient gills, oversized surfaces designed to pull in whatever oxygen remains. Others take a different route. They slow down, way down. They drop their energy use to a bare flicker, moving as little as possible, burning almost nothing, so that the tiny amount of oxygen they can extract is actually enough. In a place with no air to spare, doing nothing becomes a superpower. The less you demand, the deeper into the dead zone you can go. And why would any animal want to go there? Why fight this hard to live in suffocating water? Here's the twist that flips the whole thing around. And it's the most Twilight Zone move imaginable. Because almost nothing else can follow. The oxygen minimum zone is deadly, yes. But if you can survive it, it becomes a fortress. A predator that needs a lot of oxygen. A big, fast, active hunter. Physically cannot chase you into the low oxygen band. It would suffocate trying. So an animal that can tolerate that water has found something precious in a world with no cover. A refuge. A place to rest, to hide, to escape the constant pressure of being hunted. Protected by the one thing that would kill almost anything that came after it. The suffocating water becomes a wall that only you can pass through. You don't hide behind the danger. You hide inside it. That is such a Twilight Zone solution that it's almost funny. In a layer where there's nowhere to hide, some animals turned the deadliest water in the region into their personal safe room. The thing that makes the oxygen minimum zone a death trap for most life is exactly what makes it valuable to the few who can endure it. The threat and the shelter are the same water. Survival down here doesn't mean escaping the danger. Sometimes it means becoming the only thing that can live inside it. And now let's do the comparison I keep coming back to, because this one genuinely surprises people. The trench, the deepest, most extreme place, the one we're told to fear, is in many ways better off than this. Down at the very bottom, in the deep trenches, the water is often reasonably oxygenated. Cold, dense, deep water tends to carry oxygen with it. So an animal at the bottom of the Mariana Trench can at least breathe. The crushing pressure will get you. The cold and the emptiness and the endless dark will get you. But the water itself isn't refusing you air. Here, in the shallower Twilight Zone, it is. Let that sit. This layer, sitting hundreds of meters above the trench, closer to the surface, closer to the air, contains water so starved of oxygen that it would kill you where the deepest point on Earth might not. The place we think of as safer because it's shallower holds a threat the deepest place doesn't. That's the Twilight Zone all over. It refuses to behave the way your instincts say it should. Shallower should mean easier, safer, more breathable. Instead, you find a band of quiet suffocation wrapped around the middle of the ocean, above one of the most oxygen-rich extremes on the planet. So stack it all up. This is what an animal in the Twilight Zone is actually up against, all at once. Constant predators, no cover in any direction, a relentless need to stay invisible, food that is scarce and unpredictable, and now in many regions, water that can barely be breathed. Every one of those is a survival problem on its own. Down here, they all apply simultaneously. To exist in this layer, an animal has to solve all of them at the same time, every moment of its life. And that raises the question that pulls us into the next piece of this. If food is this scarce, and oxygen is this tight, and every scrap of energy is this precious, then how does anything down here get big? How does anything grow large enough to be a serious predator, when the environment seems designed to keep every animal small, slow, and starving? A big body needs a lot of food and a lot of oxygen, and the Twilight Zone is stingy with both. The answer is that the predators down here didn't get big the way predators up here do. They couldn't afford to be powerful, fast, muscular hunters. The environment simply won't pay for that lifestyle. So they became something else, something stranger, and honestly, something worse. They became bodies, built almost entirely around a single, desperate problem. What do you do when a meal might come only once in a very, very long time, and you cannot afford to miss it? The answer to that question produced some of the most grotesque, nightmarish shapes in the entire ocean. And every one of them makes perfect, brutal sense once you understand the hunger that built it. Here's the problem the Twilight Zone hands to every predator that wants to eat something bigger than a speck. Food is rare, not just scarce, rare. In the open middle water, a hunter might drift for days, weeks, maybe longer, without a single decent meal swimming into range. There's no schedule, no guarantee of when the next one comes, or if it comes, or how big it'll be. And when something finally does appear out of the dark, it might be the only real chance that animal gets for a very long time. So imagine designing a predator around that single, brutal fact. You might get one shot, and you have no idea when. Everything about your body now has to answer one question. When a meal finally arrives, how do you make absolutely sure you don't lose it? Not how do you chase it down, not how do you overpower it. How do you never, ever miss? That question is what built some of the most grotesque shapes in the entire ocean. And I want you to understand, before we look at them, that none of them are grotesque by accident. Every nightmare feature down here is a precise answer to the problem of rare food. These aren't monsters. They're solutions. Horrible, brilliant solutions. Start with the mouth, because that's where the hunger shows first. Up here at the surface, a predator's mouth is usually sized to its prey. A bit bigger than what it normally eats, with some margin. That works when food is reliable and roughly predictable. But down in the twilight zone, you can't afford to be picky about size. If the only meal you've seen in 3 weeks happens to be almost as big as you are, you cannot let it swim away just because it won't fit. Turning down food down here isn't caution, it's suicide. So the mouths got bigger and bigger, until you get animals whose mouths seem to make no sense for the size of their bodies. Jaws that open far wider than the head they're attached to, gapes that look almost cartoonish, like the whole front of the animal unhinges. That's not for show. A mouth that huge means the animal can take prey it has no business being able to swallow, prey close to its own length. When you only get one chance, you build a mouth that can accept almost anything that chance delivers. The gulper eel is the animal that pushes this to its absolute limit, and it's worth picturing clearly. Most of its body is a thin, whip-like tail, unremarkable, almost frail. And then the front end is almost all mouth, an enormous, loose balloon of a mouth that seems to belong to a completely different, much larger animal. When it's just swimming, that mouth folds down and the eel looks almost normal, if a bit odd. But when it feeds, that mouth opens into a vast, gaping pouch, far bigger than the rest of the animal, sweeping through the water like a net stretched over a set of jaws. The gulper eel isn't built to fight prey. It's built to engulf whatever it encounters in a single, enormous, opportunistic gulp. But catching the meal in your mouth is only half the problem. Now you have to hold it. And here's where the Twilight Zone predators reveal the second half of their design. And it's just as unsettling as the first. The teeth. So many of these deep hunters have teeth that look purely evil. Long, thin, needle-like fangs. Sometimes so big the animal can't fully close its mouth over them. It looks like overkill. It looks like cruelty for its own sake. It isn't. Those teeth aren't primarily for killing. They're for not losing what you've caught. Look closely and you'll notice something. The teeth usually angle backward, inward, toward the throat. That's the whole point. In the dark, you can't afford a struggle where your prey wriggles free and vanishes back into the black. So, the teeth form a one-way trap. Anything that goes in can't come back out. A meal that's caught can only move in one direction, deeper, into the mouth. Those horrifying fangs are a cage. The prey isn't being stabbed to death so much as it's being prevented, absolutely, from escaping. Once you're inside, the geometry of the teeth means the only way forward is down. And then comes the third problem, the one that follows from solving the first two. If your mouth is huge, and your teeth guarantee you keep whatever you catch, then sooner or later, you're going to catch something bigger than your own stomach can normally hold. What happens then? You can't spit it back out. That violates the entire strategy. You have to be able to swallow it and store it, no matter the size. So the stomachs stretch. Some of these animals have stomachs that can balloon out to hold prey larger than the predator itself. The meal goes in, and the body simply expands around it, a distended sac holding an animal that, by any normal logic, should not fit inside the thing that ate it. You'll see photos of deep-sea fish caught with their whole body deformed, swollen around a lump that's clearly another entire fish nearly their own size. That's not a mistake or a freak accident. That's the design working exactly as intended. Rare food means you take everything you can get, even when everything is bigger than you are, and your body is built to accommodate the excess. Now put all three pieces together and look at the animal you've made. A mouth that opens wider than its own head. Teeth that trap anything that enters. A stomach that stretches to swallow prey larger than itself. This is a body engineered from front to back around a single terror, the terror of the missed meal. Every feature that makes these fish look like monsters is really a hedge against starvation. They are shaped by hunger, the way a coastline is shaped by the sea, relentlessly, over unimaginable time, until the form is nothing but the record of the pressure that made it. And here's the twist that should reframe the whole picture. With all this fearsome equipment, you'd assume these are aggressive, active hunters, prowling the dark looking for a fight. They're almost the opposite. Most of them barely move. They can't afford to. Remember the oxygen and the scarcity. A predator that swam around constantly searching for food would burn far more energy than the rare meals could ever replace. It would starve itself hunting. So the winning strategy isn't to chase. It's to wait. To hang motionless in the black water, doing as close to nothing as a living thing can do, and let the meal come to you. These monstrous-looking animals are mostly patient, still, conserving everything. The horror isn't in how they attack. It's in how long they can wait, perfectly ready, doing nothing at all, for something to blunder into range. Picture the Twilight Zone as a room full of loaded traps, each one hanging silent in the dark, most of them weeks from their last meal, none of them moving, all of them ready. That stillness is the real face of this place, not a frenzy of hunting, a vast, patient, motionless waiting. And that patience tells you something the mouths and teeth alone don't. It tells you that in the Twilight Zone, aggression is a luxury almost nobody can afford. Energy is too precious to waste. Even the fiercest-looking animals down here are living on a razor-thin budget, spending as little as possible, betting their entire existence on rare, unpredictable windfalls. The scary teeth are real. But behind them is an animal that is, most of the time, starving quietly in the dark, doing nothing, hoping. Compare that one last time to the trench. At the bottom, the scavengers wait too. But there's no drama to it, no trap, no engineering of hunger into monstrous form. The trench floor is a slow, sparse graveyard where things drift down and get quietly consumed. The Twilight Zone is different. Here, scarcity didn't produce emptiness. It produced these, bodies twisted into extraordinary shapes by the pressure of the missed meal, hanging in the dark, built entirely around the fear of losing the one chance that might not come again for a very long time. So we've now met the hunters this place builds. Huge mouths, trap teeth, stretching stomachs, endless, motionless patience. And it would be easy to walk away thinking that's the rule down here. That everything strange in the Twilight Zone is a starving killer wearing a nightmare for a face. But the Twilight Zone is about to punish that assumption hard. Because the single most infamous animal in this entire layer, the one with the most frightening name, the one that sounds like it crawled straight out of a horror story, turns out to be almost none of these things. It doesn't hunt like this. It doesn't trap prey. In fact, it barely hunts at all. And its real story is stranger and gentler than anything its name would ever let you guess. It has one of the most menacing names ever given to an animal: the vampire squid. In the original scientific Latin, it's even worse. It translates more or less to the vampire squid from hell. Everything about the name tells you to be afraid. It sounds like a predator built for horror, something that drains its victims in the dark, and the way it looks does nothing to calm you down. Picture it: a dark, reddish body, deep and wine-colored, skin studded with what look like spines, eyes that, relative to its body, are among the largest of any animal on Earth, huge, glassy, and depending on the light, glowing red or blue, and a web of dark skin connecting its arms, so that when it pulls those arms up and over itself, it wraps its whole body in what looks exactly like a living cloak lined with fangs. It looks like a tiny Dracula floating in the abyss. The name, the color, the eyes, the cloak, the spines, everything about this animal screams monster. And it's all a bluff, every bit of it, because the vampire squid, despite the most frightening name in the deep sea, is one of the most harmless animals down there. It doesn't drink blood. It doesn't hunt fish. It doesn't chase, ambush, or trap anything. It has none of the mouths or teeth or stretching stomachs we just spent all that time on. The vampire squid is, of all things, a gentle drifter that eats garbage. And once you understand what it actually does for a living, it stops being a monster and becomes something almost stranger. A quiet recycler surviving in a place that would kill nearly everything we've met so far. Let me start with what it eats, because that's the reversal that undoes the whole scary image. Remember the constant rain of dead material falling from the surface, the stuff we've mentioned again and again, the debris of all that life up top, sinking slowly down through the water, bits of dead plankton, scraps of animals, waste, particles, all of it drifting down in a soft, endless snowfall. Scientists actually call it marine snow. And it's exactly as gentle as it sounds. A slow, silent fall of dead matter through the dark. That marine snow is what the vampire squid lives on. Not prey, not blood. The falling dust of the dead ocean. And the way it collects that snow is the opposite of everything a monster would do. The vampire squid has two long, thin filaments it can extend out into the water, far longer than its own body. It drifts, almost motionless, and lets these threads trail out into the dark. As marine snow falls past, it sticks to the filaments. Then the squid draws the threads back in and, using mucus, gathers the collected particles into a little ball of food and eats it. That's the whole hunt. There is no hunt. It's the deep sea equivalent of standing still in a gentle snowfall with your arms out, waiting for flakes to land, then eating what you've caught. The fanged cloak, the glowing eyes, the demon name. And its actual life is quietly sweeping crumbs out of the water. So why the cloak? Why the spines, the menace, the whole horror movie costume? Here's where the vampire squid reveals that it isn't a predator's body at all. It's a survivor's body, built for defense, not attack. That cloak of webbed arms, the thing that makes it look like a vampire wrapping its victim, is a shield. When threatened, the vampire squid flips those arms up and over itself, turning inside out, pulling the dark, spined web around its whole body like armor. From the outside, the soft, vulnerable animal disappears, and what's left is a small, dark, spiky ball that looks a lot less appetizing. The spines, by the way, are soft. They're not weapons at all. The entire terrifying display is a defensive posture from an animal that has no real way to fight back. It doesn't attack. It cowers brilliantly. And it has one more defensive trick that fits its gentle nature perfectly. Most squid, when frightened, shoot out a cloud of dark ink. But the vampire squid lives in near total darkness, where a cloud of black ink would be useless. You can't hide a shadow in a place that's already black. So it does something else. When it's really alarmed, it releases a cloud of glowing, sticky, bioluminescent mucus. A burst of sparkling light particles that hangs in the water, dazzling and confusing a predator, while the squid drifts quietly away into the dark. It doesn't fight. It doesn't flee at speed. It throws a handful of living glitter and vanishes. Even its panic is gentle. Now here's the detail that ties the vampire squid back into everything we've built so far, and it's the reason this animal is a survivor where others aren't. Where does it live? It lives by preference in exactly the water we talked about 2 chapters ago. The oxygen minimum zone, the suffocating band, the layer where the water barely holds enough oxygen to sustain life, where most animals can't follow. The vampire squid has made its home right inside the dead zone. Think about how that reframes it. This soft, slow, harmless little recycler has done something almost none of the fearsome predators can do. It has moved into the most hostile water in the region and thrived there. It survives on the lowest oxygen levels of almost any animal its kind, its body tuned to demand so little that it can live where the fast, powerful hunters would suffocate. The scariest-looking animal in the Twilight Zone is not scary at all, and it wins not through weapons, but through endurance, patience, and the ability to live comfortably in water that would kill the monsters. It doesn't need teeth. It needed a place nothing else could follow it into, and it found one, and it made it home. So the vampire squid is the Twilight Zone's great lesson in miniature. We look at it, and our instincts scream danger. The name, the cloak, the red glow, the fangs that aren't fangs, the spines that don't stab. And every one of those instincts is wrong. The real animal is a gentle, drifting, garbage-eating survivor that hides in poison water and defends itself with glitter. It is proof that down here, strange does not mean dangerous, and frightening does not mean deadly. We built a monster out of a shape, the way we've built monsters out of shapes over and over throughout this whole story. And the real creature turned out to be doing something far quieter and far more clever than we imagined. And it's also, weirdly, not a true squid. Not quite a squid. Not quite an octopus. But a lone survivor of an ancient lineage. The last of its kind. Drifting in the dark long after its relatives disappeared. A living relic, mislabeled as a demon. But there's one last thing the vampire squid teaches us. And it points straight into where we're going next. Because at least the vampire squid is a single, whole animal. One body, one creature, one thing you can point to and name. And I've been promising you this whole time that the Twilight Zone breaks the rules you think are unbreakable. So here's one you've probably never even thought to question. The idea that a hunter is a single animal. One body, one creature, one life. Down here, that rule breaks too. Because there is a hunter in the Twilight Zone that stretches longer than a whale. Longer, by some accounts, than almost anything else alive. And it is not one animal at all. It's a colony, a crowd of separate bodies, born from one, fused into a single drifting weapon, hunting together as one thing with no central brain to command it. And once you understand how it works, it may be the strangest living thing in this entire layer. Here's a question you've probably never had to ask because the answer always seemed obvious. What counts as one animal? A fish is one animal. A squid is one animal. You are one animal. A body, a life, a single thing. That rule feels so basic, it's not even a rule. It's just how living things work. The Twilight Zone breaks it, because drifting through this dark water is a hunter that can stretch longer than a blue whale, one of the longest living things on the entire planet. And it is not one animal. It's a colony. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, of separate bodies, all born from a single original, all fused together into one long, coordinated, drifting weapon. It's called a siphonophore, and it forces you to admit that even your most basic idea of what an individual is doesn't hold up down here. Let me explain what that actually means, because it's easy to say colony and hard to picture. A siphonophore starts as one, a single organism which then buds off copies of itself, the way a plant might grow new shoots. Except these copies don't detach and swim away. They stay connected. And here's the part that bends the mind. The copies don't stay identical, they specialize. Different bodies along the chain take on completely different jobs. Some become swimming units, pulsing to move the whole colony through the water. Some become feeding units, with mouths and stomachs, doing the eating. Some become stinging units, armed with tentacles full of venom, doing the killing. Some handle reproduction. Each one is technically its own body. But none of them can survive alone, and all of them together function as a single animal. So is it one creature or thousands? The honest answer is both and neither. And the question doesn't quite work down here. It's a single hunter made of a crowd, a living thing that is also a colony of living things, all descended from one, all working as one, with no clear line between where the individuals end and the animal begins. The Twilight Zone took the most fundamental unit of life, the individual body, and dissolved it. Up here, that idea is bedrock. Down there, it's negotiable. Now watch how this colony hunts, because this is where it stops being a biology puzzle and starts being genuinely unsettling. The stinging units, those specialized bodies armed with venom, trail their tentacles out into the water, and a siphonophore can arrange those tentacles into a curtain, a vast, drifting net of stinging threads spread across the dark water, sometimes hanging in a spiral or a sheet, waiting. The colony doesn't chase. It doesn't need to. It simply becomes a wall of venom draped across the Twilight Zone, and anything small that swims into it, one of those countless little migrating fish, a shrimp, a creature trying to slip through the dark, brushes a tentacle, gets stung, gets held, and gets pulled into one of the feeding units to be digested. The siphonophore is a net that grows itself, hangs itself, and eats whatever it catches. Think about how well that fits everything we've learned about this place. The Twilight Zone is full of small animals, spread thin, constantly moving up and down. How do you catch prey that's scattered across an enormous volume of water? You don't hunt them one by one. That costs too much energy for too little return. You spread out. You become huge and thin and passive, and you let the sheer size of your stinging net do the work. A siphonophore turns its whole length into a trap that covers a vast stretch of water, and then it waits, in classic Twilight Zone style, for the crowded migrating life of the layer to blunder into it. It's the same patience we saw in the fanged predators, but scaled up into something the size of a whale and made of 1,000 bodies. And here's the micro twist that makes it stranger still. This enormous coordinated hunter has no brain, no central command, no single mind directing the whole operation. There's no captain in there deciding what the colony does. Instead, the coordination emerges from the parts. The swimming units pulse, the stinging units sting, the feeding units feed, And out of all those separate bodies doing their separate jobs comes behavior that looks unified and purposeful. A single animal hunting as one, with nobody actually in charge. It's coordination without a controller. A crowd behaving as an individual, with no individual inside it giving the orders. Let me put the scale in terms you can feel, though I have to be careful here, because the exact lengths are genuinely hard to measure and still debated. These colonies are so long and so delicate that measuring one in the wild is extremely difficult. They stretch out in ways that are hard to pin down, and they can break apart when disturbed. But the estimates for the longest ones are staggering. We're talking about colonies that may rival or exceed the longest animals on Earth in sheer length. A thread of connected life stretching dozens of meters through the dark. And that's the image I want you to hold. Not a bulky, massive body like a whale, but something impossibly long and impossibly thin. Longer than a whale, but no thicker than a rope in places. A ribbon of coordinated life glowing faintly, drifting through black water, dragging a curtain of venom behind it, because yes, many of them glow too. They fold in the bioluminescence we've talked about all along, some using light to lure prey closer to the stinging net, another layer of the Twilight Zone's endless manipulation of light. So picture the complete thing, a living chain, tens of meters long, made of 1,000 specialized bodies. No brain among them, glowing softly in the dark, hanging a net of venom across the water, waiting for the crowded life of the layer to drift into it. It is beautiful, and it is alien, and it is one of the most successful designs in the entire ocean. And it barely resembles anything our instincts recognize as an animal at all. Now bring the trench back in one more time, because the contrast has never been sharper. Down at the bottom, in that cold, sparse graveyard, there is nothing like this. Nothing that dissolves the boundary of the individual. Nothing that stretches the definition of a single life across 1,000 fused bodies. The trench holds a few scattered, ordinary, whole animals living out simple lives in the dark. The Twilight Zone holds a creature that makes you question what a creature even is. The deepest place on Earth couldn't produce this. It took the crowded, competitive, light-soaked, prey-rich Twilight Zone to build a hunter that isn't even one animal. Because only a place this full, this contested, this alive, could reward something this strange. So we've now watched the Twilight Zone break rule after rule. Deeper isn't deadlier. Light hides you instead of revealing you. The brightest color makes you invisible. The scariest animal is harmless. And now, a single hunter is actually 1,000. Each one felt like the limit of how strange this place could get. Each one turned out not to be. And there's one rule left. Maybe the most personal one of all. Because for all the strangeness we've seen, every animal down here still has to do the one thing every living thing has to do. It has to reproduce. It has to find a mate in the dark, in the emptiness, in a layer so vast and so sparsely populated that two animals of the same kind might drift their entire lives and never cross paths. Finding a partner in the Twilight Zone isn't just hard. For some of these animals, it's nearly impossible. And the solution that evolved to deal with that impossibility is, honestly, the most disturbing thing in this whole story. Because when finding a mate is this hard, one animal solved it by making sure that once it finally found a partner, it would never, ever have to let go. It would fuse to it, permanently, become part of its body, and slowly disappear. Forget the teeth. Forget the venom, the huge mouths, the glowing traps. The most disturbing thing in the entire Twilight Zone isn't how these animals kill. It's how some of them fall in love. Because down here, finding a mate is a survival problem as brutal as finding food. And the solution that evolved to solve it is one of the strangest, most unsettling arrangements in all of biology. Start with the size of the problem, literally. the Twilight Zone, is enormous. It wraps the whole planet in a band hundreds of meters thick, and while it's crowded overall, it's crowded mostly with tiny, scattered life, spread across an unimaginable volume of dark water. Now imagine you're a particular kind of deep-sea anglerfish, one of those nightmare-faced hunters with the glowing lure. You live your life alone, drifting in the black, waiting motionless for rare prey, and at some point, you have to reproduce, which means somewhere out in all that darkness, you have to find another anglerfish of your own species of the opposite sex, in a place with no light, no landmarks, no way to see more than a short distance in any direction. Two animals in a layer of ocean that could swallow entire mountain ranges, trying to find each other in the dark. It's almost hopeless. The odds of drifting close enough to another of your kind, by chance, in that vast blackness, are terrible. And evolution's answer to those terrible odds is the thing I want to tell you about, because once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Here's the first piece. In these anglerfish, the female is the one you picture, the big one, the fanged hunter with the glowing lure, sometimes the size of a football or larger. And the male is not that. The male is tiny, absurdly tiny. In some species, he's a fraction of her size, a small, simple creature that looks almost nothing like her. He has no lure. He barely has a hunting body at all. What he does have is enormous eyes and incredible organs for smell, because the male anglerfish has exactly one job, and his whole body is built around it. Find a female. That's it. He isn't built to hunt or to live a long, independent life. He's built to be a searcher, a tiny homing device drifting through the dark, sniffing and staring for any trace of a female of his kind. And when he finally finds one, after what may be a desperate, one-shot search through the blackness, because if he doesn't find her, he starves. He does not court her. He does not swim alongside her. He bites her. He clamps his mouth onto her body wherever he can reach, her side, her belly, her back, and he holds on. And then something happens that has no real parallel anywhere in the animals you know. He doesn't let go, ever. His mouth fuses to her skin. The tissues of his face melt into the tissues of her body. Their flesh joins. Their blood supplies connect, so that he's now feeding directly from her, drawing nourishment out of her bloodstream. He has permanently attached himself to her, physically merged, and from this point on he will never separate, never swim freely again, never live an independent life. And then he begins to disappear. Once he's fused and drawing everything he needs from her body, he no longer needs most of himself. He doesn't need to see. So his eyes degenerate and dissolve away. He doesn't need to swim, so his fins waste. He doesn't need to digest food or navigate or do almost anything a fish does. So those parts of him break down and vanish, one by one. His body is absorbed, stripped down, reduced, until what's left of the male is little more than a lump on the female's side, a small sac of tissue, permanently attached, connected to her bloodstream, containing the one thing she actually needs from him, the ability to produce sperm. He's given up his eyes, his fins, his independence, his shape, almost his entire self, and become, in the most literal sense possible, an organ on her body, a living reproductive attachment, a part of her. Sit with what that actually is. He solved the impossible problem of finding a mate in an endless dark ocean by making absolutely certain that once he found her, he would never lose her, by ceasing to be a separate animal at all. He merged into his partner and dissolved, and she in turn now carries a permanent built-in source of sperm, ready whenever she needs to reproduce, never having to search the dark again either. The problem was that mates are almost impossible to find down here. The solution was, find one once and then never ever be apart. Even if being together means one of you disappears into the other. And here's a detail that makes it even more remarkable. In some of these species, the female doesn't just carry one fused male. She can carry several. Multiple tiny males found over her lifetime, each one attached, each one absorbed, each one reduced to a little bump of reproductive tissue on her body. She becomes a single animal carrying the dissolved remains of several partners, permanently woven into her flesh. What we call one anglerfish, in those cases, is really a female plus the absorbed bodies of the mates she collected in the dark. I want to be careful and honest here, because the fine details of how this works are still being studied, including a genuine puzzle that fascinates scientists. When any animal's tissue fuses with another animal's tissue, the body's immune system should reject it violently. Your immune system attacks anything that isn't you. That's why organ transplants are so difficult. And yet these anglerfish fuse two separate individuals into one, blood supply and all, without that rejection tearing them apart. How they pull that off, how the female's body accepts the male's tissue as part of itself, is something researchers are still working to fully understand. The mechanism is real. Exactly how it works at the deepest level is still being uncovered, which somehow makes it more unsettling, not less. We're watching two animals become one, and we don't entirely know how they get away with it. Now step back and look at what this tells you about the Twilight Zone. Every strange thing we've seen down here traces back to the same handful of brutal pressures. Darkness, scarcity, emptiness, the near impossibility of finding anything in a vast dark volume of water. The huge mouths came from scarce food. The invisibility came from constant predators. And this fusion, this dissolving of one animal into another, comes from the sheer difficulty of finding a partner in a place this big and this empty. It's not cruelty. It's not horror for its own sake. It's the same logic as everything else down here. A desperate, elegant answer to a problem the environment made almost unsolvable. When the dark makes finding a mate nearly impossible, the animal that survives is the one that, having found a mate once, refuses to ever let go, even at the cost of its own body, its own eyes, its own separate existence, and compare it one final time to the trench. Down at the bottom, in that empty graveyard, nothing is forced into an intimacy this extreme, because nothing down there is playing a game this complicated. The trench is simply sparse and cold. The Twilight Zone is something else, a place so vast and so alive and so demanding that it reshapes not just how animals hunt and hide, but how they love, how they mate, what it even means to be a single self. It took the most private, universal act in all of life, and it warped it into something that dissolves the boundary between two animals entirely. So we've now watched this layer break every rule we brought with us. What's deadly, what's visible, what color means, what a monster is, what an individual is, and now, what it means to be one self versus two. Every assumption dismantled. But there's one last reversal, and it's the biggest of all. Because through this entire story, you've probably been thinking of the Twilight Zone as a distant alien place, strange, unsettling, but far away and separate from your life. A curiosity in the dark. That's the final assumption left to break. Because this hidden layer, this crowded band of liars and hunters and dissolving lovers, is not separate from your world at all. It may be quietly running it. Here's the thing I've saved for last, and it's the reason the Twilight Zone should unsettle you long after you've forgotten the anglerfish and the glowing traps. Everything I've described, the crowded dark, the nightly migration, the dissolving mates, the hunters that aren't even single animals, You've probably been filing all of it under strange but distant. A weird alien world, far below, separate from yours. Interesting? Not your problem. That's the last assumption left to break, because this hidden layer isn't separate from your world. It may be one of the machines keeping your world livable, and we're only just starting to understand how much of the planet's balance runs through it. To see it, go back to the migration, that nightly rise and fall of billions of animals we started with. I told you it was the largest movement of life on Earth. What I didn't tell you is what it does to the planet. Follow the logic. Every night, that enormous mass of animals swims up toward the surface to feed on the rich life up top. They eat up there, in the surface waters. Then, before dawn, they sink back down into the dark, carrying all that food inside them. And down in the depths, they do what all animals do. They digest, they produce waste, they breathe, some of them die. Which means all the carbon they packed in up at the surface gets released or deposited hundreds of meters down. Do you see what that is? It's a pump, a living pump running every single night all over the world. The migrating animals of the Twilight Zone are physically carrying carbon from the surface, where it's part of the air and water system we live in, down into the deep ocean, where it gets locked away far from the atmosphere. Every night, billions of animals act as a conveyor belt, moving carbon down and out of circulation. Scientists call this part of the biological carbon pump, and the Twilight Zone is right at the heart of it. And it's not just the migration. Remember marine snow? That constant, gentle fall of dead material drifting down from the surface. The stuff the vampire squid lives on? That's carbon too. All that dead matter sinking down through the Twilight Zone is carbon leaving the surface world and heading into the deep. The Twilight Zone is the layer all of it passes through. The great sorting house where some of that falling carbon gets eaten and recycled, and some continues down into the deep sea to be stored for a very long time. This unremarkable half-lit band of water is one of the main places where the ocean pulls carbon out of the surface system and buries it below. Now, why should that make the hair on your neck stand up? Because carbon in the atmosphere is the thing that warms the planet. The amount of carbon that stays up in the air and surface system versus the amount that gets pulled down into the deep ocean is one of the great dials controlling Earth's climate. And that dial is turned, in significant part, by the living machinery of the Twilight Zone. This crowded layer of hunters and hiders and glowing liars, drifting a few hundred meters below the waves, is quietly helping to regulate the temperature of the entire planet. The strangest place in the ocean isn't just a curiosity, it's load-bearing. It's part of what keeps the surface world, your world, stable. Let me be careful and honest here, because this is exactly the kind of thing where the drama has to stay tied to what we actually know. Scientists are still working out the numbers. How much carbon the Twilight Zone moves, how much it stores, how much the nightly migration contributes versus the falling snow, how it all changes from ocean to ocean and season to season. The magnitude is genuinely still being measured, and the estimates keep getting refined as we build better tools to study a layer we can barely reach. But the core fact is not in doubt. This zone is a major part of how the ocean moves and stores carbon, and therefore a major part of how the planet manages its own climate. We're not sure exactly how big the number is. We're sure it matters. And here's where the story turns genuinely uncomfortable, where the creepiness stops being about strange animals and becomes about us. We have just figured out, in recent years, two things at almost the same time. First, the Twilight Zone is far more full of life than we ever realized, possibly the largest mass of fish on the planet, that band of trillions we talked about at the start. Second, That same layer is quietly helping to run the planet's carbon system. And the moment we learned there might be an enormous, barely touched mass of fish down there, guess what some people started thinking about? Fishing it. Right now, there is real interest in the Twilight Zone as one of the last great unexploited fisheries on Earth. All those small fish, all that biomass, sitting there mostly unused by humans. It's a tempting target, and it points straight at a problem we may not fully understand until it's too late. Because if the Twilight Zone is a key part of the carbon pump, if those animals migrating up and down every night are part of what pulls carbon into the deep and helps keep the climate in balance, then stripping that layer of its life might do something we can't easily predict or undo. We would be reaching into a machine we barely understand that helps regulate the whole planet and pulling pieces out of it before we figured out what those pieces do. Sit with that combination, because it's the real horror of this place, and it has nothing to do with teeth, the most populated layer on Earth, one of the least explored places we know of, a system that quietly helps hold the planet's climate steady. And we are considering large-scale disturbance of it while we still don't understand how it works. We have better maps of the surface of other planets than we have of this layer beneath our own ships, and we're eyeing it hungrily as a resource. Compare that, one final time, to the trench. The trench is famous, extreme, and, for all its fame, almost irrelevant to your daily life. It sits at the bottom, sealed off, empty, affecting almost nothing up here. You could ignore it entirely, and your world would go on exactly as it is. The Twilight Zone is the opposite in every way that matters. It's not remote from your life. It's woven into it. The air you breathe, the climate you live in, the stability of the whole surface world, all of it is connected through the carbon pump to what happens in that crowded dark band every single night. The scariest thing about the deepest place on Earth is how alien it is. The scariest thing about the Twilight Zone is how much it matters, and how little we know about the thing we're about to disturb. So the picture is finally complete. We started by breaking the assumption that deeper means deadlier, that the trench, the deepest point, must be the most frightening. And chapter by chapter, we've watched the real weight of the ocean shift upward into this half-lit middle layer, where life is densest, where deception is the native language, where the water can suffocate you, where hunters aren't single animals, where mates dissolve into each other in the dark. And now, finally, where the machinery that helps run the entire planet quietly turns, unseen. A few hundred meters beneath the surface, we thought we understood. There's only one thing left to do: to go back one last time, to the edge of what we actually know, to that small circle of light in the black water, and everything waiting just outside it. Because for all of this, for everything we've uncovered, the truth is that we've barely looked. And what we've seen so far is only the narrow beam of a single light in a darkness that stretches around the entire world. Picture the one image we keep coming back to: a small circle of light in black water, a robot on a tether, hanging somewhere in the middle depths, its lamps carving out a little sphere of visibility in the endless dark. Inside that sphere, you can see a few drifting particles, maybe a flash of something red, the shimmer of a transparent body sliding past, and at the edge of the light, always, a shape, something moving, just outside the beam, there and then gone before you can name it. That circle of light is everything we know about the Twilight Zone, and the darkness around it, the darkness that stretches out past the beam in every direction, wrapping the entire planet, is everything we don't. Let's go back to where we started, because the whole point was to overturn it. We began with the Mariana Trench, the deepest place on Earth, the one we're all taught to fear. 7 miles down, crushing, black, the ultimate extreme. And the assumption underneath that fear was simple and wrong. That deepest must mean scariest. That the bottom of the ocean is where the real nightmare lives. It isn't. We've spent this entire descent proving it isn't. The trench, for all its extremity, is a still, cold, near empty place. A graveyard where almost nothing happens, where life is so sparse that a single fish is an event, where the water is dark, but at least honest. It's extreme, but extreme is not the same as unsettling. You can stand at the bottom of the trench in your imagination and feel the pressure and the cold and the emptiness, and it's a clean kind of fear, the fear of a void, the fear of nothing at all. The Twilight Zone offers a worse kind of fear, not the fear of nothing, the fear of everything, all around you, unseen. Go back through what we found up there, in that shallower, closer, half-lit band. It's the most crowded layer in the ocean, possibly the largest mass of animal life on the planet, and it looks empty precisely because everything in it is built to disappear. It's a place where light is a liar, where a glow might be a lure with teeth behind it, where the brightest color turns an animal invisible, where a predator carries a searchlight its prey can't even see. It's a place where the water itself can suffocate you, where the deadliest band becomes a fortress for the few who can breathe it, where the scariest-looking animal is a gentle recycler, and the softest drift of light is a wall of venom the length of a whale, made of 1,000 fused bodies with no brain among them, where mates find each other once in a lifetime of darkness and then never let go, dissolving into one another until two animals become one. Every one of those was a rule you brought with you, broken. Deeper is deadlier. Broken. Darkness hides you. Broken. Here light hides you, and being lit can save you. Bright colors expose you. Broken. Here red erases you. A monster is a killer. Broken. The demon named Squid eats dust. A hunter is one animal. Broken. The longest one is a crowd. Two creatures are two selves. Broken. Down here they merge into a single body. One by one, everything your instincts insisted was true turned out to be a surface world rule that simply doesn't apply a few hundred meters down. And then came the last turn, the biggest one. The discovery that this strange, distant-seeming layer isn't distant at all, that it's part of the machinery keeping the whole planet in balance, pumping carbon out of the surface world every single night, helping to hold the climate steady beneath a surface we assumed had nothing to do with it. The trench sits at the bottom, sealed off, affecting almost nothing you'll ever experience. The Twilight Zone is woven into the air you breathe and the world you live in. One of these places is a dead end. The other is a beating, breathing, load-bearing part of the living planet. So here's the reframe, the thing I want you to actually walk away with. The reason the Twilight Zone is creepier than the Mariana Trench was never about which one is deeper, or darker, or more extreme. The trench wins all of those. It's about which one is stranger, fuller, closer, and less understood. And on every one of those, it's not even close. The trench is far away and empty and knowable. The Twilight Zone is right beneath you, packed with life, running on deception, and almost entirely unexplored. The deepest place on Earth is frightening because there's nothing there. The Twilight Zone is frightening because there's everything there, and we can barely see any of it. That last part is what should stay with you, because for everything we've covered in this whole descent, the migration, the counter-illumination, the red that vanishes, the dragonfish's private light, the anglerfish, the siphonophore, the carbon pump, every bit of it comes from that same small circle of light in the dark, a handful of robot dives, a scattering of glimpses, animals that fall apart before we can bring them up, that we've had to reconstruct from wreckage and shadow, and a few precious minutes of footage. We built our entire understanding of the most populated layer on the planet out of what we could catch in a narrow beam, in a darkness that goes on for thousands of miles in every direction. Think about the barrelay, how we got its face completely wrong for decades because we only had broken specimens, because we mistook its nostrils for its eyes, because the transparent dome that made it extraordinary never survived the trip to the surface. That wasn't a one-time mistake. That's the whole Twilight Zone. Almost everything down there is more fragile than our tools, stranger than our assumptions, and better at hiding than our lights. For every animal we've named in this story, there are surely others out past the edge of the beam that we've never seen at all. Creatures doing things we haven't imagined, solving problems we don't know exist, in the dark, right now, tonight, while you're hearing this. And here's the part that turns unsettling into urgent. We are reaching for this place before we understand it. We've realized there might be more fish down there than anywhere else on Earth, and the impulse is already there to go take them, to fish the last great untouched layer of the ocean, the same layer that may be quietly helping to regulate the climate of the entire planet. We would be pulling pieces out of a machine we've barely begun to map without knowing what those pieces do. The Twilight Zone spent millions of years perfecting the art of not being seen. And now, at the exact moment we finally started to see it, we're deciding what to do with it. So leave the trench where it is. Deep, extreme, and mostly empty. It was never the thing to be afraid of. The thing to be afraid of, or at least the thing to be humbled by, is the layer just below the sunlight. The one you'd swim over on a calm afternoon without a second thought. Right now, under that surface, the migration is beginning again as the light fades. Billions of animals are rising through the dark to feed. The lures are glowing. The transparent bodies are drifting up to hunt. The whole vast, crowded, deceptive machine is turning, the way it has every single night for longer than there have been humans to wonder about it. And all we've ever seen of it is one small circle of light, in an ocean of darkness that stretches around the entire world, with something always moving, just past the edge of the beam.